Hello, and welcome to Best English Podcast. I'm Joe.
Hello from me too. Great to be here.
Today, we're diving into something really useful, I think, for everyone, how to learn more effectively.
Yeah.
How to make new information and skills actually stick.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. It's really about understanding a bit about how our brains actually work, how they process and retain knowledge.
Exactly. And there are quite a few techniques out there, right? We're going to highlight some key ones today.
Absolutely. Strategies that science suggests can actually make a difference.
Okay, so where should we start? How about note-taking? I hear that's a big one.
Oh, definitely. There's some compelling research on, well, writing notes by hand versus typing them on a laptop.
Right, pen and paper. Seems a bit old school, maybe.
It might seem that way, but the physical act of writing, it seems to engage your brain differently. When you type, you can often type really fast, right?
Yeah, sometimes faster than you can think, almost.
Exactly. And that often leads to just transcribing verbatim.
Verbatim, so like writing down word for word what you hear.
Precisely. You're just capturing the words, but maybe not processing the meaning as deeply. Whereas handwriting, well, it's slower.
Okay.
So you're almost forced to summarize, to rephrase things in your own words to keep up.
Ah, I see. So you have to think about it more as you write.
Exactly. It's a deeper level of processing. And studies show that this deeper engagement actually improves how well you do on tests later. You remember it better.
Interesting. So ditching the laptop for a notebook might actually be a smart move for learning.
It really might be, yeah. Especially in lectures or meetings.
Okay, what's next?
Yeah.
I know sleep is always mentioned when talking about memory.
Oh, hugely important. Sleep isn't just downtime. It's crucial for consolidating memories, basically locking in what you've learned.
So like studying, sleeping, then studying again.
That's the idea. There was this neat French experiment. They had people learn Swahili translations for French words.
Translation. So like the word in the other language?
Yep. They had two groups. One group studied in the morning, had a break, then studied again in the evening.
Okay, standard study day.
Right. The other group studied in the evening, then slept, and then studied again the next morning. The total time between study sessions was the same for both.
And the results, let me guess, the sleep group did better.
Significantly better. They could recall, remember about 10 out of 16 words on average.
Okay.
The group that just took a break during the day, only about 7.5 out of 16.
Wow, that's a pretty big difference just from sleeping in between.
It really is. It shows sleep actively helps cement that learning. It's not passive.
Good reminder for students pulling all-nighters.
Definitely not the best strategy.
All right, let's switch gears a bit. What about learning physical things? Motor skills.
Yeah, motor skills, anything involving movement, like playing guitar, learning a sport, that kind of thing.
Right. Is there a trick to learning those faster?
Well, there's evidence that varied practice helps. Practicing slightly differently each time rather than doing the exact same thing over and over.
How so?
There was a study using a computer-based motor task. One group just repeated the exact same practice routine in 2 sessions.
Okay, the control group.
Right. The other group did the same first session, but in the second session, the task was slightly altered. Just a small change. The group with the slightly varied practice, they nearly doubled their speed and accuracy compared to the group that just repeated.
Doubled. Just from a small change.
Yeah. It seems that slight variation forces your brain to adapt and learn the underlying skill more robustly, not just memorize one specific set of movements.
Can you give a real-world example?
Sure. Think about tennis. If you're really trying to perfect your serve, you might actually benefit from occasionally practicing with rackets that have slightly different weights.
Huh. So not always striving for perfect repetition, but introducing small challenges.
Exactly. It seems to make the learning more flexible and stronger in the long run.
Okay, this all ties back to memory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
How we actually store this stuff.
Fundamentally, yes. Learning is memory formation. When you learn something, your brain is creating or strengthening neural pathways.
Pathways, like connections between brain cells.
That's a good way to think about it, yeah.
Yeah.
Connections. And new information usually starts in short-term memory, kind of a temporary holding area.
And the brain decides if it's important enough to keep.
Pretty much. If it thinks, yeah, this is useful, it works on moving it to long-term memory. That's where we retain it, keep it over time.
So the big question is, how do we convince our brain that something is important?
Well, that leads us to some other key strategies. One is pretty obvious, maybe.
Let me guess. Practice.
You got it. That old saying, practice makes perfect. There's a reason it exists.
Repetition. Doing it over and over.
Right. That repetition is a strong signal to your brain. It says, hey, pay attention to this. This skill, this fact, it matters. That makes it much more likely to get stored long term.
Makes sense. Keep knocking on the brain's door until it lets the information in permanently.
Sort of, yeah. Another really powerful technique is connecting new stuff to what you already know, your background knowledge.
Like building bridges from the old to the new.
Exactly. When you can link a new idea to something familiar, it gives the brain an anchor point. It makes it much easier to file away that new information in long-term storage. Teachers do this all the time, trying to activate prior knowledge.
Yeah, I remember teachers doing that. What do we already know about X?
It really helps build that network of understanding.
What else? How about actually using the information?
Absolutely critical. Active engagement. Doing things with the new knowledge.
Like?
Well, say you learn a new math concept, don't just read about it, solve problems using it. That active processing, like critical thinking or problem solving, forces your brain to grapple with the information.
Makes it more memorable because you've worked with it.
Precisely. An engaged brain, one that's actively involved, is far more likely to retain things.
Okay, that makes sense. How about using outside help?
Good point. Looking at real-world examples of a new concept that's an abstract idea, right? Seeing it in action makes it less abstract, more concrete.
Easier to grasp.
Definitely. And also talking about it. Discussing what you're learning with classmates, colleagues, anyone.
Explaining to someone else.
Yeah. That's a fantastic way to solidify your own understanding. You often find gaps in your knowledge when you try to explain it.
True. You have to organize your thoughts.
Yeah.
Another thing, what about watching experts?
Oh, yes. Learning from people who are already skilled, watching them demonstrate, but also asking them to model their thinking.
Model their thinking. What does that mean exactly?
It means getting them to explain their thought process out loud. How do they approach this problem? What steps are they taking mentally? Why did they make that choice?
So you see the how and the why, not just the result.
Exactly. It gives you a different perspective, often a much deeper one, and can really accelerate your learning.
Okay, lots of great strategies. We're nearing the end. Any final big tip?
One really important one, especially relevant for students. Avoid cramming.
The classic last-minute study session before a test.
Right. Cramming, trying to stuff tons of info into your brain in a short time, it just doesn't work well for long-term memory.
So what's the alternative?
Spaced repetition. Spread your learning out over time. Study a bit, take a break, come back to it later, maybe the next day. Rest is key.
Like exercise for the brain, you need rest days.
That's a perfect analogy, actually. Learning is like exercise. Your brain needs that downtime to process and consolidate. Just like muscles need rest to repair and grow, space practice is far more effective.
That's a great analogy comparing learning to exercise. Makes very clear.
Yeah, the brain needs that space.
Okay, so let's quickly recap. We've talked about handwriting notes for deeper processing,
The power of sleep for memory consolidation.
using varied practice for motor skills,
The importance of repetition, just plain practice.
connecting new ideas to what you already know,
Actively engaging with the material, not just passively receiving it.
using resources like examples, and talking to others.
Learning from experts, watching how they think.
And finally, spacing out your learning instead of cramming.
That's a good list. Lots of tools there for people to try.
Absolutely. So for everyone listening, maybe think about which of these resonates with you. Which ones could you maybe start incorporating into how you learn things, whether it's for school, work, or just a new hobby?
Yeah, finding what works best for your own style is key. Maybe experiment a little. See what helps things stick for you personally.
Great final thought. It's about making learning more efficient and hopefully more enjoyable too.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for sharing all this great insight today.
My pleasure. Always fun to talk about learning.
And thank you all for listening to Best English Podcast. We'll catch you next time.